Right, it's now question time. Has anyone got any questions for our panellists? Please kind of put your hands up so I can run along quite quickly whilst we're running, but keeping warm, of course. So anyone at the back of the room first, because it's a bit longer for me to run that way. Any questions? If you just say your name and where you're from.
Still thinking of what the question is. I'm Andrew McDermott, excuse me, Acting Chief Executive at New Park Trust. So in terms of Fields in Trust, I suppose one question about that is, do you feel there's any tension in terms of your ability to get partners and people to sign up to be part of Fields in Trust subsector areas, with then a concern about that limiting future opportunities to change with the community? You mentioned being adaptable, but actually is there a risk that that puts that green space in aspic and means that people aren't able to change it in the future to adapt to those needs?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think that there has been a bit of a misconception sometimes about what we're trying to do when we're wanting to protect that space. And when we say we want to protect it, we absolutely don't want to fossilise this. That's not what we're interested in at all. We want to be able to make sure that there is access to green space for future generations, and that that space needs to evolve and adapt to be able to meet the needs of a changing community. So sometimes the public's understanding of what our role is can be slightly confused, in that they would assume that if there was a change of use from one sports facility to another, or there was to be the installation of a new sports facility within the green space, that we would object to that because the space has been protected. But in fact, we obviously want to be able to encourage and promote as much use and inclusivity of these spaces as possible. Angela, my colleague who's sitting on the table here and as a trustee of the organisation, would be able to tell you just how many times those conversations happen. But I think that we primarily have a very supportive relationship with the local authorities that we work with to try and encourage, you know, the best outcome for that space to meet the needs of the community.
Thank you. Any more questions? Anyone on that side of the room? Oh. I'm going to run this way first, purely because I can keep walking this way, and then we'll go back again.
Thanks so much. Anna Barker, University of Leeds. It's really useful to have great data to show actually where we need to improve access, and that's, you know, I've aspired to 10 or 15-minute walk access to parks, but how do we actually get there? So how do we actually, once we know, obviously that's the first step in understanding where we need to improve access, how do we actually take that next step? What's the top tips for people in the room?
Is that to all of us?
Yeah, well,
Do you want to start?
anyone?
Go left or right? Oh, yep, okay. There's just a slight fear factor of the mic, isn't it? So I think it's that whole piece, and it takes a lot of effort about that co-design and co-creation with communities, because one of my colleagues said the other day, she said to me, and so this is somebody who's totally connecting people with nature, said, well, I don't take my daughter to the park that we can walk to because it's not as nice as the one 10 minutes drive away. And so we talk about equality, diversity and inclusion, but back to what you were saying about equity, and that it's about that, also about that quality of green space, and that actually that you're making it so it's desirable, but that's that co-creation piece with people, as opposed to, I think we were talking earlier with Debbie, who said she'd been to a country park that I used to look after a long time ago. The whole country park piece actually did some of that work, and we shouldn't throw out some of the good ideas from the past about how well those places can serve, as opposed to sort of the leftover mentality that's driven potentially by development and things like that, is that, oh, it's a bit on the edge. So I actually live in Wales, but our village playground is in the middle of the village, whereas some of the new developments, they're on the outside, and people use the ones on the middle more. So it's that co-creation. What do people really want?
I'll have a couple then as well, I think, to help this, because it is the million-dollar question, how do you get this? Because it's one thing breaking the back of the data now, which has been brilliant, and that's accessible as well to you all, which is fantastic. So a couple of things we need to add to that is trying to embed the policy locally. So what we're particularly keen to do is to see these kind of indices and the frameworks embedded within local planning policy across England. So that's obviously at the local authority level. We're also trying to work on the national planning policy framework too, as well to support that. The other aspect is thinking cross-sectorally about who else is interested and has a stake in the game here, particularly at a local level, in terms of being able to support the funding, because we know that that's a particular challenge as well, in terms of how do we get the funding frameworks to support this. But actually, there's a lot of support coming through cross-sectors such as health, education, vast estates there as well that can add to some of this space, some of which can be accessible as well. So bringing together different sectors to actually help solve and co-design with communities is also very powerful as well for us.
I think I would just add to that really that cross-departmental approach and your slide in your presentation that kind of represented where all of those drivers are overlapping, that feels like one of the most important things to be able to crack, because I think there are a lot of people with a lot of skin in the game. There are a lot of agendas that are crossing over, but I think until there's proper recognition of where that needs to be able to fund some of these projects and ideas, then we're not going to actually see how that impacts at local level. So whilst we can see that there is an enormous role for parks and green spaces in social prescribing, if there is no funding for parks and green spaces, then you cannot socially prescribe to them. And I think until we can kind of recognise how do you unlock that funding to make that happen, and see the piece in the round, then it is difficult to get to whether it's the 10-minute piece or the 15-minute piece, and to have that on a really equitable basis.
Excellent, thank you. Obviously quality is key there for Green Flag, and I think Paul's here yet and Michelle, but of course I'll promote Green Flag. Question across again.
Hi, James Willett, Head Ranger for Leicester Country Parks, Leicester County Council. You picked up some of the things I was going to ask, but the 4,000 new parks and green spaces, do we think that's achievable as a target? And if so, what sort of, how would we get there? Is there a commitment from central government or local councils to actually deliver on that?
No. I mean, that's the analysis that we did to support the Green Space Index this year, and to try and understand, okay, if this is what we've got right now, and if we assume, rightly or wrongly, that we maintain the current UK-wide portfolio, just to be able to keep track with the amount of space that would be needed and to meet those population projections, we would need about 4,000 new spaces. And the likelihood of us being able to create those is limited in part, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be in the places where we would need them. So obviously there's a lot more nuance to that as kind of a sort of a headline grabbing statistic to think about. We'd need at least 4,000 more spaces, but I think the changes to planning policy to be able to embed new spaces within developments, and for those spaces to be slightly less formulaic, so that we can think about how do we really drive the developer position so that they are delivering the kinds of green spaces that can meet those 6 themes that I was speaking to, so that they are delivering what looks like good in communities and in a way that they need. That's what I think we need support from government to be able to, to try and push the dial on.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add to that. We're not there, and I was going to say yet, because actually it does feel like we've made quite a lot of progress actually in recent times as well. So that gives me an element of hope as well in terms of if that's the right sort of thing. Because actually we're starting to see commitments coming through in policy. It would be very good to be able to turn that into targets. Now, some of you might not like targets, but actually from a policy perspective, that can really help to provide the framework over funding. Where do we kind of want to get to? So there's certain aspects of that would be enormously helpful for us. And I think the other angle that's really playing out now is people wanting this. So that's another really important part of the work that we're all doing, all of us here actually, just in terms of people engagement, community engagement, and that voice as well, asking for that. So that can be very powerful for us.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'd like us on that side of the room if possible, just to give me that little bit of warming up time.
Hello, my name's Paul Bagley. I'm the chairman of Newark Sports Association, which is a charitable community benefit society. We've, Newark, the urban area of Newark has lost over 20 hectares of urban green space over the past 10 years. One of the parks that was lost is in a very is in a low income area. It's where you would want to retain a park. Sport England, who are statutory consultees on the loss of parks and green space and pitches, didn't object to the planning application. Yet we've lost, so we retained 3 football pitches but lost a park. If you're talking about cross-party, cross-government, cross-departmental working, how are you going to address situations like that?
We all find these sorts of things that do happen locally, just in terms of local decisions, local priorities, and they can be particularly frustrating, can't they? And the angles that we're sort of looking at is actually, if we get a shared view around policy, it's actually how does that policy then get implemented with all of the decision makers that need to come together in a place, and actually being able to get that vision piece right for us. And actually, a lot of the work that's coming out now with the data is really helping us to be able to start to speak with one voice over that direction of travel as well for us. There will always be particular challenges down in local decision making and local priorities, but if we can help get some of those policies right to help influence that, then that's really where we'd be wanting to be able to help focus. We have got good connections with Sport England. They're well connected with all of this work as well, so these are our challenges to work through.
I suppose just to add to that, it is that point of Sport England are looking at the pitch position and making sure that there is sufficiency of playing pitches, and that's very different to thinking about whether or not there is sufficiency of open green space where there isn't a statutory consultee, so you can't call that in. And I think that's where that vision and that shared priority really needs to be clarified, because I think if we look down that line to the Unite the Movement strategy from Sport England, then there's very little recognition of the role of parks and green spaces at the beginning of people's journeys to becoming active. And if you are inactive, which is what the strategy is trying to address, then you are unlikely to begin to be active by beginning to play football in a club or rugby or any other kind of formalised sport, but you might go for a walk in the park. And so if you don't have access to go to, for a walk in the park or to do your couch to 5k or whatever else it might be, then again, I think it's getting the role of parks and green spaces higher up the agenda and recognised for the value that they have in meeting all of those different things.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Right, now it's a time for a break, which means we're going to the thrashing barn. I think it's the thrashing barn for our refreshments.